Now to what you come to expect from the show, and that's, of course, a chat about the day's politics. It is insignificant compared to what's been going on west of Ipswich, but let's get into it. Of course, today was the day when petrol prices, they went up by the best part of a cent per litre. The total cost now, when it comes to the amount of tax that you have to pay on your petrol, is now going to be $1,500 a year. But shh, don't tell anyone, because apparently tax cuts are going to be amazing. They'll fix everything. And as you know, Chris Bowen, he's out and about, bouncing about, suggesting that brand new rules that will determine what cars can and can't be sold in Australia will apparently not affect any cars that you can choose to buy in Australia. Garbage, really. But what I wanted to talk about tonight, because I did talk about this in some detail last night, it's a reminder to join us on Sunday nights as well, was the press release from the Minister. Now, this was deliberately timed to distract from the increase in petrol taxes that was taking place today, and largely, well, the media turned around and fell for it. Because there was this grab, which was also offered up by the Infrastructure Minister, Catherine King, that was the head of the press release.
We know that by 2028 this will save average consumers on each vehicle each year over $1,000.
Notice the fine print? I'll get to that in a second. But what did our media decide to cover? Well, surprise, surprise. Did they cover the increase in petrol tax today, or were they talking up a potential petrol saving years down the track? Were they put simply running government spin, or telling you the reality of what this government was doing, which is increasing your tax today?
Modelling shows that by 2028, Australians could be saving up to $1,000 per car per year.
Australians will save up to $1,000 annually,
saving about $1,000 a year,
and is expected to lower petrol bills.
This is an announcement about a system that doesn't kick in until the middle of the year, but doesn't really get going until next year. And as the fine print in the press release shows, it doesn't even really kick in until the year 2028. Now, again, in the blink of our lives, that is a relatively short period of time. But in terms of immediate need to reduce petrol prices, the federal government should have been announcing today a reversal in their decision to increase petrol excise. They should be making the same announcement ahead of what is due to happen in August. Remember, twice a year, petrol goes up according to inflation. And while the government will say that inflation is under control, the reality is that because prices keep going up, then so do the taxes that they take on things like petrol, on things like tobacco, and things like alcohol. But to give you an idea of 2028, there's the Olympics this year, and then that's 4 years after that, when Los Angeles will be having the Olympic Games, is when you will potentially, maybe, if you buy one of these cars, a brand new car in 2028, is when you may potentially save $1,000. By the way, by 2028, Joe Biden will be a mere 86 years of age. Australia's population will be 28 million people. And Anthony Albanese will, should he be successful at the next federal election, be going for his third term as Australian Prime Minister. It would also be 3 years in 2028 after he broke this promise by 2025.
Reducing power prices by $275.
By 2025, $275 a year.
$275 a year.
We'll get power prices down by $275 a year.
But no doubt, just like the broken tax promise, you of the media will be focusing more so on what does this mean for Peter Dutton. They truly think you are this stupid, that literally the message they feed to the media is about a saving maybe in 4 years' time versus the petrol tax that increased today. That is their decision today. Meantime, industry groups have responded saying, yeah, this doesn't quite seem to be what they suggest it is. You see, many of the vehicles that just you will not be able to buy because they sit outside of all of these new fuel limits are things like Ford Everests and Rangers, Nissan Patrols and Pathfinders, also Hiluxes and Mitsubishi Tritons, the types of cars that Australians actually like to buy. In fact, according to the Australian Automotive Dealers Association, many utes and SUVs don't meet the target for next year, let alone the requirements by 29, which is going to be 60% lower than it is today. Meantime, to suggest that there will be as many options for consumers in this space in 5 years' time is overly optimistic. As Paul Grover told Peter Credlin tonight,
what Minister Bowen has completely forgotten about is that the reason we couldn't have this standard up until now has got nothing to do with electric cars. It's got to do with the fact that the fuel in Australia is not suitable for use with those European latest emission standards.
And the newer versions of fuel, which are apparently going to be cleaner, guess what? It costs more to refine. So the petrol will be more expensive than even the expensive petrol that we have now. Of course, all of this is about trying to get us to an electric vehicle future, but it's one that Australians aren't picking up by the dozen, as you would assume if you read some parts of the media, which is why the federal government has decided to put the luxury car tax onto hybrid vehicles. I keep talking about this because nobody else is mentioning it. And any hybrid vehicle, and remember there was about 100 and something thousand hybrids that were sold to about 80,000 electric vehicles, anything over $75,000, every dollar over that will end up with a 33-cent tax because apparently it's a luxury car. Meantime, of course, there is the issue of how things move around Australia. Now, the federal government has already decided to introduce a new piece of taxation about heavy vehicle haulage around the country. It means the cost of moving things around the country will increase. But of course, in Canberra land, the food just apparently grows inside your local supermarket. Now, according to local truckies, this one from Gippsland says that it's going to cost about $40,000 a year extra to stay on the road. Many smaller trucking companies won't be able to do it, so they will, of course, go out of business. So big unions and big business will get together again with big government and they get even a bigger slice of the pie. But in Victoria, there is a conversation happening as we speak about even further increasing the amount that it costs for things to move from the Port of Melbourne, around Melbourne and then out to the rest of Victoria. Jacinta Allen, the Victorian Premier, is apparently seriously considering a new proposal that would add between $150 to $250 to any truck that wishes to drive freight out of the Port of Melbourne. The trucks will be slugged with a tiered tax of $150 to $250 per container. Now remember, trucks can take a couple, so you can easily see how this money's going to add up. Because you see, about 1 million visits to the Port of Melbourne happen each and every year from trucks. If you're going to slug them $150 to pick up just one container, or maybe $250 for one container, and they're able to take 2 or 3, you can see what's going to happen here. All of it is about trying to, well, do the truckies out of business. The plan here is to try to get as much freight moving by rail as possible. But as you know, regardless of whether you're in suburban Melbourne or regional Victoria, not every supermarket has a train station attached to it. So at some point in time, somebody is going to have to put it on the back of the truck. Whether or not they will still have to pay the same fee or not, we'll all find out together. But put this together with the federal government and their increases on taxes that are being paid by truckies, it means that whatever's inside those containers is going to cost more. And you see, the government works out that if it's just $150, it doesn't really matter. But when you add it up by the more than 1 million trucks that go in and out, times, say, 1, 2, or maybe even 3 containers, depending on how big the truck is, you can see how we start to get to a very big chunk of change sooner rather than later. Again, decisions made by people who have no idea how the real world actually works. And they think you're stupid enough to be distracted by a potential saving of $1,000 if you buy a new car 4 years from now. And the media helps them spread their spin. Meantime, even more talk about tax this evening. Now, a group of people have got together and are demanding that there should be a brand new tax on sugar in Australia. Now, for obvious reasons, the big bloke on the telly, well, he's got his plenty fair share of sugar. But the suggestion here now is that we must have a sugar tax because Australians are too fat and it costs too much money when fat people go to hospital.
Anything that we can do to reduce consumption of sugary drinks will reduce the overall population's risk of cancer.
The Heart Foundation supports a tax on manufacturers of sugary drinks to encourage them to reduce the sugar content in their products.
It's time that the Australian government stepped up and implemented this policy, putting Australians' health over company profits.
Every part of your life, they find a new way to tax. The old joke about taxing on breathing, well, wouldn't be that long. You see, your job is not to be a citizen. Your job is not to have a government that reflects your will. Your job is to shut up and pay your tax. That's it. Your job is to be dependent on government via welfare, or if you run a business, that your biggest customer is the government, or for a job you work for the government. You see, this is the whole plan, is that eventually you become so dependent on government that you will never stand up to government. The people who operate in small business, well, bugger them. They're the losers who decide to work too hard for themselves. As for the food, well, apparently it will just magically appear and not be particularly tasty to eat. Now, also on cost of living, today the Brotherhoods of St Lawrence decided to release a new report, and it is again about cost of living and how tough people are finding it right now. The reason I mention this is not because you haven't heard the message a million times before, but after I just told you about a sugar tax, after I just told you about fuel tax, after I just told you about truckie tax, do you really believe the Prime Minister when he says that he's totally and always focused on the cost of living? Well, I don't either. Because in this report, it shows people who are on low-income wages or people who are on pensions, they continue to do it particularly tough. Here are just a couple of the examples of Albo's Australia. Emma is a 50-year-old single mother of two who's puzzled by the sharp increase of costs. I don't know. Before I seemed to manage fine, but now all of a sudden I'm not. I don't know why, whether it's the rising prices, because petrol is nearly double, so you can only put half a tank in, it costs double. I don't understand how it had to jump by that much. Then there's another one about food. This is Luke, he's 27 and he's on a pension. He's juggled self-employment with managing his health condition. He explained that he cut back on food for himself. He had sleep for breakfast, 2 meals if he's not working on a day, and only 1 meal a day if he is working. What about Joshua, a 22-year-old with 2 casual jobs? He relied on his medication to function well. Sometimes I'm not able to afford my medication. It really gets down to the wire, so I'm only, this sounds irresponsible, but before my parents were able to help, he only took half of his dose. And then there's Rachel, a single mother of 3, and she told the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, not a far right-wing charity, that we've not used the heater, even though it's been incredibly cold. I use thermal clothing, a scarf and a jacket so I don't have to pay for extra electricity for heating. You see, this is what frankly pisses me off about the constant refrains that come out of Canberra. The garbage, the BS and the spin, that they really care about the people who are doing it most tough in the country. They're the people who tell us that a tax cut of $14 a week is going to be enough to turn somebody's life around on $45,000. But the reality is it's not. It's never going to be able to save those people's lives. It's not going to change their living conditions at all. Instead, it's all about the politics. And you see, in the end, the people who talk about politics for a living on television, radio and write for it in the newspapers, or the people who participated for a living as political staffers or the MPs or the ministers, they only care about the politics. So despite the fact that life is as hard as it has ever been in Australia, throw on top of that the lack of safety that exists in the very communities that are supposedly being taken care of by these people, forgive me if I don't fall for the spin, because I know you don't either.